Year 12s, today we're going to be talking about social expectations and community attitudes. Sometimes we may believe that one group's way of speaking is better than another, and linguistic forms then become a source of linguistic value judgments. The habit we have of forming opinions based on the social signals we find in people's speech is what constitutes linguistic prejudice. The conclusions we draw about groups based on their speech can be positive, negative, or accurate, but more often than not, they're misguided. We're taught as young children that we should speak a certain way, and therefore we end up judging those who speak differently to the way we do. They're seen as speaking incorrectly or badly, and we've seen that when we looked at, for example, Aboriginal English and ethnolects a couple of weeks ago. We know that when groups variate and use different language forms to the standard, they're often perceived to be incorrect. Linguistic research has shown that speakers of high-status speech styles are stereotyped in terms of competence and attributes relating to socioeconomic background, while speakers of low-status speech styles are stereotyped less favourably along these lines. That is, speakers will draw on features of other people's speech to provide non-linguistic information about them, such as their background and even personality traits like their honesty, reliability, friendliness, toughness, intelligence, and so on. Someone's speech might invoke qualities that are highly valued by the dominant community, which is overt prestige, or by local subgroups within the broader community, which is covert prestige. Standard Australian English is associated with power, education, and wealth, things which are highly valued by many Australians. This variety therefore has overt prestige, and people will adhere to these norms to achieve particular social purposes. In the case of covert prestige, language users adhere to the norms of the subgroup, which might contradict the norms of wider society. An illustration of the impact of overt and covert norms and their associated prestige can be found in a famous piece of research by Giles and Powsland in 1975. A male psychology lecturer, who could use both BBC English and a Birmingham accent, presented the exact same lecture to two different groups of students, using one accent for each. When asked what they thought of the lecturer, the students rated him more intelligent when he used his BBC accent, and also wrote much more about him when he was using this accent as well. Alright, we're going to start by looking at gender. So first of all, to get you started, I'd like you to go to the classroom and open up the gendered language task. Once you've done that, come back to the video. Okay, lexical and semantic variation. Over the centuries, value judgments have been attached to men's and women's vocabulary. Writers, who were pretty much always men from the 18th and 19th centuries, wrote a lot on the ephemeral nature of women's vocabulary. A lot had to do with the perceived unimportance of what women had to say. In this era, standardisation was the goal, to fix language in place and avoid allowing it to change. As women were introducing ephemeral words, so that basically means words that aren't permanent, they're new, they might not last for very long. They made the task of standardising the language more difficult. Alright, now I'd like you to pause the video and do the gender in advertising task that's on the Google Classroom. Variations in discourse. So, is it true that women talk more than men? We know that that's a stereotype, but is there actually any truth to it? So I'd like you to just pause here, read each of these quotes so they're different proverbs or, sayings from societies, and then we've got a quote from a Shakespearean play as well. So for each one, I'd like you to just jot down one dot point about what this is saying about how women use language. Once you've done that, come back to the video. Despite the widespread belief that women are more talkative than men, research findings constantly contradict this. It's actually men who talk more. Jean Coates, a linguist, said this on the subject. Men have been shown to talk more than women in settings as diverse as staff meetings, television panel discussions, and also husband and wife pairs in spontaneous conversation. When asked to describe 3 pictures, male subjects took on average of 13 minutes per picture compared with 3 minutes and 17 seconds for female subjects. Linguist Janet Holmes found the same pattern in her 1995 study. After analysing discussion time at 100 public seminars, she found in all but 7 instances men took up more of the airtime than women. What's more, they asked around 2/3 of the questions. So how do we explain this perception that still lingers that women talk more than men? We seem to have very different expectations of male and female talk. As Coates explains, in many cultures, the silent woman is put on a pedestal as some sort of ideal type of a woman. Even Sophocles, who is an ancient Greek playwright, wrote in the 5th century that silence makes a woman beautiful. If silence is perfection, then any talk at all will appear as too much talk. Oscar Wilde, a famous writer, said that women are a decorative sex. They never have anything to say, but they say it charmingly. Often these types of stereotypes are self-fulfilling prophecies. We notice these features that confirm our expectations. An example of this stereotype is teachers who assert that boys and girls are given equal speaking time. However, recordings of classes show that this is not the case. The distribution of talk is uneven, with boys dominating the discussion. When evaluating talk by the sexes, we do need to take into account context and social purposes, and in particular to recognise the difference between the public speaker and the private speaker. While there's no doubt that males contribute more of the talk in public and formal domains, women are more likely to hold their own in a more relaxed and informal environment. Women are typically more comfortable contributing to private speaking, but this is changing. It seems that men and women may be using talk for different purposes. Private talk, for example, is not concerned with asserting status and power. It's more a matter of developing and supporting social relationships. According to Janet Holmes, men's talk tends to be more referential or informative, while women's talk is more supportive and facilitative. Carmen Fort, a linguistics professor, explained it this way: young women take linguistic features and use them as power tools for building relationships. Okay, research has shown several major differences between male and female talk. This would be a good thing to put in your notes. So women generally use more question forms in conversation. Women use more linguistic forms associated with politeness than men, so they're more likely to use politeness strategies. Women use more linguistic hedges such as I think, I feel, or sort of, or kind of. They use more back channeling or minimal responses such as and yeah. Women exhibit more paralinguistic responses like smiling, nodding, grimacing, and so on. Women and many younger speakers, including males, use discourse markers such as I mean, you know, and like. Women tend to be more supportive in conversations in that they work quite hard to initiate and maintain conversation more than men. Alright, variation in phonology and grammar. Many early observations on women's language assumed that women actually used incorrect language. Lord Chesterfield is famously quoted as saying in 1741, "Most women and all the ordinary people in general speak in open defiance of all grammar." Otto Jespersen claimed that women often spoke in unfinished sentences, which he suggested was a result of not thinking before speaking. He also thought that women were more likely to stick to simple and compound sentence structures, whereas men were more prone to complex sentence structures. Given the education system at the time, so men were given far more education than women, it's likely that these comparisons are actually between women's spoken language and men's written language. More modern research suggests that the above assumptions are actually the other way around. Women have come to be known as the upholders of what is correct when it comes to grammar and pronunciation. The strongest evidence for this is in relation to phonology. In 1960, a study conducted by Mitchell and Delbridge found that teenage girls were more likely to speak cultivated Australian accents than teenage boys. This study has, however, been questioned since the data was gathered based on the children speaking and reading to their teachers, and it's possible that the girls were able to switch to a more formal variety in this context. Studies conducted in the USA, Britain, Australia and New Zealand suggest that there is a tendency for women to prefer overtly prestigious forms, while men prefer covertly prestigious forms. There are many suggested explanations for this: the status consciousness of women, the influence of their social networks, their social powerlessness, their roles in society, their tendency to speech accommodation. Perhaps it's because society expects better behaviour from women. There's a contradiction in this body of research. Many studies show also that females are pulling away from the standard, the overtly prestigious norms, and adopting innovative ways of speaking. Okay, I'd like you now to go to the classroom and do the manslater task. Alright, expectations of generation. So we're talking about age groups here. Teen speak or youth speak is a significant social dialect which allows young people to express in-group identities and to exclude the out-group. Socio-linguistic variation is closely related to language change, and the way younger people speak can give clues as to where language might be heading. The speech of older generations is generally more conservative than that of younger generations. Linguistic changes take a while to catch on, and this fact is reflected in these age differences. Some linguistic innovations stick around, like cool, which was widely adopted in the 1960s and was carried into adulthood by many speakers and is now quite standard. Alright, the lexicon. Lexical features innovated by younger speakers tend to be viewed by the wider community as a passing fad, or worse, as a threat to the standard. Shortenings, for example, such as defs for definitely and probs for probably, were seen as evidence that language was going to the dogs. The difficult part of studying lexicon and teen speak is that many of the terms used in past years when texts and articles were published are no longer used. They've gone out of fashion. Alright, pause the video here and do this task. So make a list of as many lexemes used by teenagers in 2020 as you can. For each one, predict if you think it will still be a passing fad or if it will be carried with young speakers into adulthood. So if you think about in 5 years' time, can you still see people using this word or this phrase or not? Alright, vocal fry. So vocal fry is best described as a croaky or raspy in voice quality, used particularly at the end of a sentence. So we'll look at this comment here. Basically what it's saying is it's pronounced as super interesting, like that really low, gravelly, scratchy sound towards the end of words. I've exaggerated it a bit there, but hopefully you get what I mean. Alright, I'd like you to pause here and complete the vocal fry task that's on the Google Classroom.